the race baiting that we've seen from Trump, suggesting that she's only recently discovered her black identity, for example, that was rather ignored in the detail of it by the Harris campaign and Harris. And as tonight, she was simply saying, well, that's the same old thing that we've come to expect from Donald Trump.
First of all, I mean, lots of people have criticised Kamala Harris for not doing this sit down interview, saying she's been dodging it. Did she come out of this well?
She did come out of it rather well on its own terms, because she didn't make any major gaffes. She got across some of the policy ideas that she's already been talking about, and underlined them. But to be honest, it was a rather soft interview with not much forensic interrogation of her positions and her changes in position. She came up with a new catch-all phrase for explaining some of her inconsistencies, which is that my values have not changed on the key issues like climate change and immigration, which she was kind of allowed to get away with. And so I'm sure her campaign will be delighted, actually, although I guess there's the potential for a backlash because it wasn't really the tough interrogation that I think it had been built up to potentially be.
I mean, we have heard, haven't we, that she's changed her mind on fracking. There's been some challenges about her attitude towards immigration. As you say, that wasn't really challenged. Did we, though, get some greater sense of her policy direction? Because that's also been a criticism, hasn't it? That we've not really known that much about what she will specifically stand for if she's elected as president.
I think what came across to me was that she's got one or two policies of her own that she's outlined, like increasing a child tax credit, like trying to address supermarket price gouging with a law on that, which sounds very complicated to do and wasn't really probed at all in this interview, and also some help with house building and house buying. So we knew all that, and she repeated all that. But what really came across, as I say, was that she's broadly speaking sticking to the Joe Biden policy agenda, really, which is to push ahead with a lot of expensive and far-reaching measures to tackle climate change, to try and solve the border problem with some legislation that was negotiated earlier this year, bipartisan legislation that Trump insisted the Republicans not to go ahead with. And of course, that's given her a great way to counteract Trump's attacks on immigration, because it really has been very high across the southern border during the Biden-Harris administration. But she was very nice about Biden, paid him lots of tributes, and as I say, as far as I could make out, like and especially also the only foreign policy issue that really came up, which was Israel and Gaza, she stuck pretty much to the Biden position, actually.
Talk to us about the idea of sitting there with her running mate, Tim Walz. Some people suggesting that this was her, well, certainly Trump suggesting this was Kamala Harris being scared of actually being scrutinised. She needed him to effectively hold her hand. How unusual is it for the two of them, a running mate and the person running to be president appearing together? And did it work as a concept last night?
It's not particularly unusual. It got a lot of attention, I think, simply because she hasn't done any network interviews since she emerged as the replacement for Joe Biden. So we've seen many tickets, the president and the vice presidential candidate. We've seen many of them do this over the years. Following their convention, they do a pretty softball type interview that fleshes out their character as much as anything, but does go a bit into policy. So that's not what's out of the ordinary. As I say, what's a little bit unusual is that so little is known about her stance on so many issues, well, mainly because she's emerged so late in the game. That's what's so unprecedented about the 2024 American election, is that normally we get a fair idea of who the candidate is going to be much earlier in the process, much earlier in the year. There was really a surprise to her, and especially to him, to Tim Walz, that they were going to be running for the White House in a, well, what is it now, a 75-day dash.
What does it mean that she was quite dismissive once again in the interview about Donald Trump and his comments about her race and how he essentially claims that she's redefined her racial background? She literally shut that down. Was that a good way to handle it? How has that been received?
Yeah, this is the way that her campaign has been playing the attacks by Donald Trump. It's been viewing them as really trying to goad Harris into an argument of some kind. The race baiting that we've seen from Trump, suggesting that she's only recently discovered her black identity, for example, that was uh, rather ignored in the detail of it by the Harris campaign and Harris. And as tonight, she was simply saying, well, that's the same old thing that we've come to expect from Donald Trump. Next question, please. It was really as brief as that. So she doesn't want to get into talking about Trump, Trump, Trump all the time, like he's playing on her mind. She doesn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing that he's got under her skin. Uh, you could quite easily suggest that it is definitely the other way around. She seems to have really needled him, which is why he keeps coming out with all these attacks. We're not seeing quite the same. We're not seeing the same level of insult, for example, and it called to mind the Michelle Obama comment, when they go low, we go high. I'm not suggesting this is a campaign that's going to soar in the clouds um, when it comes to sparring with each other, but that's kind of the approach they've tried to adopt with Trump. And well, the campaign in the round is working, isn't it? Because week by week we're seeing that Harris has recovered all of the ground that Biden lost and has got her nose slightly ahead. However, um, it's nothing like the lead that, say, Biden had in 2020 or that Hillary Clinton had in 2016. So although she may have her nose slightly ahead, as I say, it still points to an election that's too close to call.
Mm. And when we look at the interview, I mean, she said that she is open to the idea of appointing a Republican to a key post in her cabinet. Um, there was criticism, of course, that this wasn't a live interview. Donald Trump said it should have been a live interview. I mean, the usual criticisms you would expect. I'm just wondering, I just get a sense that maybe it was a bit underwhelming, and I wonder if you think that's a fair assessment, and what impact this will actually have on the race itself, this interview, if any.
Yeah, well, when when you see that an assassination attempt on one of the main candidates barely shifted the polls, you do wonder what impact one interview can have, especially as there wasn't much new in it. As you say, the only new thing well, broadly speaking, policy wise, or in her presidential program, was that she'd put a Republican in her cabinet, and she almost seemed to seize upon that because it was put to her in a question. It wasn't her who originated that thought. So she went along with the CNN interviewer who said, "Would you consider this?" And she said, "Yeah, I would consider it actually." So I think it's in all of the headlines because nothing else new came out. And then the main thing for the Harris campaign is that they've got through their first interview in a satisfactory way for them. No major gaffes. On now to really the biggest test, and we know from, of course, Joe Biden's demise, the biggest potential um, uh, problem standing in the way, well, of either candidate is the debate between them that's coming up on September the 10th.